No black man is sitting in my cockpit. I don't care what papers you're waving at me. Period. Captain Brennan's voice boomed through first class as he blocked the cockpit door, his pilot's uniform stretching across his chest like armor. In 30 years of flying, I have kept my cockpit pure and I'm not stopping now. The black man in the Navy suit remained perfectly calm, his Federal Air Marshal badge hidden in his pocket. So you're refusing to fly with me on board, Captain? Brennan's face reddened. You can sit in the back where you belong, or you can get the hell off my plane. But you're not entering this cockpit. The captain had no idea he was failing the most important test of his career. But to understand how one racist pilot lost everything at 30,000 feet, we need to go back to that morning at Dallas-Fort Worth International. Marcus Williams arrived at DFW International Airport at 5:47 a.m., precisely 3 minutes earlier than his usual arrival time. The November morning carried that particular Dallas chill that never quite justified a heavy coat, but made you regret not bringing one. He moved through the terminal with practiced efficiency, his Navy suit impeccable despite the early hour, his movements carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated these corridors thousands of times before. At 42, Marcus had the kind of face that airline personnel usually remembered, not for any singular striking feature, but for the way every element worked in perfect professional harmony. Clean-shaven, with close-cropped hair showing distinguished touches of gray at the temples, he looked exactly like what he was supposed to look like this morning. A federal employee on routine business travel. The American Airlines check-in counter was already busy with the morning rush. Marcus bypassed the regular lines, heading straight for the priority desk where Agent Patricia Chen was processing a frustrated businessman who seemed convinced that his executive platinum status entitled him to a private jet. "Sir, I understand your frustration," Patricia was saying, her smile never wavering despite the man's increasingly red face. "But the weather delay in Chicago affects all flights equally." Marcus waited patiently, observing. Patricia's shoulders were tight, her fingers moving perhaps a bit too quickly across her keyboard, the subtle signs of someone who'd been dealing with difficult passengers since 4 a.m. When the businessman finally stormed off, muttering about taking his business to United, Marcus stepped forward. "Good morning," he said, sliding his documents across the counter. "Marcus Williams, checking in for Flight 447 to Reagan National." Patricia's fingers flew across the keyboard, then paused. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she read something on her screen. "Mr. Williams, I see you have jump seat authorization?" "That's correct," Marcus replied evenly. She looked up at him then, really looked, and Marcus saw the moment of confusion cross her features. Jump seat authorization was typically reserved for pilots, flight attendants, or airline employees commuting to work. Sometimes, very rarely, federal aviation inspectors. But Marcus didn't quite fit any of those categories, at least not in a way Patricia could immediately identify. "I'll need to verify this with my supervisor," she said, reaching for her phone. "Of course," Marcus nodded. "I'll wait." The supervisor, a harried-looking man named Tom Bradley, arrived within minutes. He examined Marcus's paperwork with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for suspicious packages. "Federal Air Marshal Service," he read aloud, then looked up sharply. "You're an air marshal requesting jump seat access?" "My authorization letter should explain everything," Marcus said calmly. Tom read through the letter again, his frown deepening. "This is highly unusual. Air marshals typically maintain cover in the cabin. They don't typically, no," Marcus agreed. "But as you can see, my authorization comes directly from the Federal Air Marshal Service headquarters, coordinated with your airline's senior management." Tom made 2 phone calls, each one moving higher up the chain of command. Finally, seemingly satisfied but still visibly confused, he handed back Marcus's documents. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Williams. Patricia will complete your check-in." As Patricia processed his boarding pass, she kept glancing at him with barely concealed curiosity. "Gate D15, she finally said, handing him his documents. "Boarding begins at 7:10. Captain Brennan is flying today. He's one of our most senior pilots. 30 years with American." "Thank you," Marcus said, noting the pride in her voice when she mentioned the captain. He tucked his boarding pass into his jacket pocket, where it rested against his Federal Air Marshal badge, the one piece of identification he hadn't shown them. The walk to Gate D15 took 12 minutes. Marcus used the time to observe, as he always did. A young mother struggled with a toddler who'd decided the airport floor was lava. 2 businessmen argued over speakerphone about quarterly projections. A elderly couple sat holding hands matching University of Texas sweatshirts proclaiming them proud grandparents. Flight 447's crew was already at the gate when Marcus arrived. He identified them immediately. Pilots had a way of carrying themselves that was unmistakable after you'd observed enough of them. Captain Richard Brennan stood near the jet bridge entrance, engaged in animated conversation with his first officer. Even from a distance, Marcus could see why Patricia had spoken of him with such reverence. Brennan looked like Central Casting's idea of an airline captain. 58 years old, silver-haired in that distinguished way that suggested experience rather than age, standing 6'2" with the kind of commanding presence that probably reassured nervous flyers the moment they saw him. His uniform was pristine, his captain's stripes catching the morning light streaming through the terminal windows. When he laughed at something his first officer said, it was the kind of rich, confident laugh that filled the gate area. The first officer, by contrast, appeared barely 30. Fresh-faced and eager, hanging on Brennan's every word like a student with a favorite professor. Marcus caught fragments of their conversation as he found a seat with clear sightlines to both the gate counter and the jet bridge. I told him, "You want to question my judgment after 30 years?" Brennan was saying. Kid was maybe 5 years out of flight school. 5 years. I was flying 737s when he was in diapers. The first officer, his nameplate read Mitchell, nodded enthusiastically. These younger guys don't understand respect for seniority. Exactly, Brennan agreed, his voice carrying that particular tone of a man used to being agreed with. This industry was built on tradition, on knowing your place in the hierarchy. Now they fast-track these diversity hires and suddenly everyone thinks they're qualified to question decisions. Marcus's expression didn't change, but he filed the comment away. He pulled out his tablet, opening what appeared to be a routine email application. In reality, it was a sophisticated recording and documentation system, already capturing ambient audio from the gate area. At 6:55, a gate agent Marcus hadn't seen before, her name tag read Jennifer Hayes, Senior Customer Service Manager, arrived and immediately approached Captain Brennan. They spoke in hushed tones, Jennifer showing him something on her tablet. Brennan's relaxed posture stiffened slightly and he looked around the gate area, his gaze sliding over Marcus without recognition or particular interest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jennifer announced over the PA system, "we'll begin pre-boarding for Flight 447 with service to Washington Reagan National Airport in just a few moments." Marcus watched as the flight attendants arrived. 4 of them, led by a senior attendant whose confident stride and easy smile spoke of years of experience. She greeted Brennan warmly, and they chatted like old colleagues who'd shared many flights together. When pre-boarding was announced, Marcus remained seated. He watched an elderly woman with a walker make her slow way down the jet bridge. A young father with twins in a complicated-looking stroller apparatus. A soldier in uniform who nodded respectfully to Captain Brennan as he passed. "Now boarding Group 1, Jennifer announced. Marcus stood gathering his single carry-on bag. He joined the line behind a woman in an expensive suit who was arguing on her phone about a merger. When he reached the gate scanner, Jennifer looked at his boarding pass, then at her screen, then back at his boarding pass. "Mr. Williams, you have jump seat authorization," she said, loud enough that Captain Brennan turned from his position near the jet bridge entrance. "That's correct," Marcus replied. Brennan's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Marcus for the first time. Really looked at him. Marcus saw the calculation happening behind those pale blue eyes. The navy suit, nice but not expensive. The carry-on bag, standard government issue. The calm demeanor, too calm. And of course, the thing Brennan's eyes lingered on longest. The color of Marcus's skin. "Jump seat?" Brennan's voice carried across the boarding area. "What airline you with?" "I'm not with an airline," Marcus responded evenly. Brennan took 3 steps closer, his height advantage more pronounced up close. "Then you don't have jump seat privileges. Those are for crew only. And certain federal officials," Marcus said, pulling out his authorization letter. "As specified in federal aviation regulation." "I know the regulations." Brennan cut him off, not even glancing at the letter. "Been flying longer than you've been alive, I'd bet. And in 30 years, I've never had a federal official in my jump seat who wasn't FAA or NTSB. His eyes narrowed further. "You neither of those." "No," Marcus agreed, "I'm not." "Then you can take your seat in the cabin like every other passenger," Brennan said, turning away as if the matter was settled. "Captain," Jennifer intervened nervously, "his paperwork has been verified by—" "I don't care who verified what," Brennan said, his voice taking on an edge that made several nearby passengers look up from their phones. The captain has final say on who enters his cockpit. That's not just tradition, that's regulatory authority. He was right, technically. The captain did have final authority over aircraft operations, including cockpit access. It was a power rarely invoked for jump seat passengers with proper authorization, but it existed. Marcus studied Brennan's face, the slight flush creeping up from his collar, the way his jaw had set in that particular way of a man who'd drawn his line in the sand. So you're refusing my federally authorized jump seat access? I'm saying, Brennan said slowly, as if talking to a child, that you can sit in the cabin. First class if you want. We've got empty seats. But you're not sitting in my cockpit. Your cockpit, Marcus repeated softly. That's right, my cockpit. Brennan's voice rose slightly. Every captain owns his cockpit, that sacred space up there, and I decide who belongs in it. First Officer Mitchell had moved closer, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. The senior flight attendant, her name tag read Sharon, was watching with growing concern. Several passengers had stopped boarding entirely, creating a backlog at the gate. Captain, Sharon said carefully, perhaps we should... What we should do, Brennan interrupted, his face now fully flushed, is maintain proper procedures. This gentleman can take a cabin seat, or he can take another flight. He turned back to Marcus, and something in his expression shifted, became harder. Your choice. Marcus maintained perfect calm, though he noticed how Brennan's eyes kept flicking to the growing audience of passengers. The captain was performing now, playing to a crowd. To be clear, Captain Brennan, you're refusing to allow me cockpit access despite my federal authorization? I don't care what papers you're waving at me. Brennan's voice boomed through the gate area. No unauthorized person is sitting in my cockpit, period. The way he said unauthorized carried weight that had nothing to do with paperwork. Several passengers were now openly filming with their phones. Marcus saw the exact moment Brennan noticed the cameras, saw him decide to lean into it rather than back down. In 30 years of flying, Brennan continued, his voice carrying that particular timbre of righteousness, I've kept my cockpit to the highest standards, professional standards, and I'm not changing that now. Professional standards, Marcus repeated, letting the words hang in the air. That's right. Brennan squared his shoulders, the 4 stripes on his epaulets catching the light. You people always trying to get where you don't belong, thinking some government paper makes you special. The gate area went silent except for the ambient airport noise. Jennifer Hayes' face had gone pale. First Officer Mitchell took a step back, as if trying to distance himself from what was happening. Sharon, the flight attendant, had her hand over her mouth. You people, Marcus said quietly, though his voice somehow carried through the entire gate area. Brennan's jaw clenched tighter. You heard me. I've seen this before. These forgeries, these attempts to get special treatment. Well, not on my aircraft. He turned to Jennifer. Get security. We have someone here refusing to follow crew member instructions. Captain, Jennifer stammered, I don't think... That wasn't a request, Brennan snapped. This is now a security issue, an individual demanding unauthorized cockpit access. Marcus remained perfectly still, his expression neutral as granite. Inside, however, he was documenting everything, every word, every expression, every reaction from the gathering crowd. His tablet, still in his hand, was recording everything in high definition. So you're refusing to fly with me on board, Captain? Marcus asked, his voice still preternaturally calm. Brennan turned back to him, and perhaps it was the calmness that infuriated him most. Marcus had seen it before. The way some people interpreted calm dignity as arrogance, especially from someone they'd already decided didn't belong. You can sit in the back where you belong, Brennan said, his voice dropping to something more menacing. Or you can get the hell off my plane. But you're not entering this cockpit. Within 5 minutes, the gate area had transformed into something resembling a crisis management center. Jennifer Hayes was on her phone, speaking in urgent whispers to someone several pay grades above her. 2 TSA agents had arrived, looking confused about why they'd been summoned for what appeared to be a paperwork dispute. First Officer Mitchell stood near the cockpit door, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a man standing on hot coals. But Captain Richard Brennan stood firm at the jet bridge entrance, arms crossed over his chest, the physical embodiment of an immovable object. Sir, one of the TSA agents approached Marcus. We're going to need you to step aside while we resolve this situation. Of course, Marcus replied, moving to a seat in the gate area where he could still observe everything. He noticed how the TSA agent relaxed slightly at his cooperation. They'd probably expected resistance. The passengers were the most interesting element. About half had already boarded, but those remaining in the gate area had formed into small clusters, each offering their own commentary on the situation. "Captain's right," an older man in a cowboy's cap was saying. "Can't have just anyone walking into the cockpit these days. Security risk." "But he had authorization," a woman in a business suit countered. "I heard him say federal authorization." "Could be fake," cowboy's cap insisted. "You see the news? People trying all kinds of things these days." Near the window, a young black woman was holding her phone steady, live streaming the entire event. "Y'all seeing this?" she was saying quietly to her audience. Captain really said "you people" in 2024 at DFW Airport. Brennan, perhaps sensing the shifting energy in the room, decided to address the passengers directly. "Folks, I apologize for the delay. As captain, my primary responsibility is your safety and security. That means maintaining the highest standards for cockpit access." "Is he even a pilot?" someone called out. "The black gentleman?" "No," Brennan replied quickly, too quickly. "He's not flight crew, that's the point. The cockpit is for flight crew only." "And certain federal officials," Marcus said, his voice carrying from where he sat. "As specified in your own airline's operations manual, Captain." Brennan's face darkened. "Don't quote regulations to me, son." The word "son" landed like a slap. Marcus was 42 years old, clearly a professional, clearly not anyone's son in this context. Several passengers winced at the condescension. "Captain Brennan!" Jennifer Hayes had returned, now accompanied by a man in a suit who carried himself with the harried energy of middle management. "This is David Chen, our station manager." David Chen looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Captain, could we speak privately?" "Nothing private about this," Brennan declared. "Transparency is important. These passengers deserve to know their captain takes security seriously." "Sir," David said carefully, "I've reviewed Mr. Williams's documentation. It's legitimate. It comes from—" "I don't care if it comes from the president himself," Brennan interrupted. "The captain has final authority over his aircraft. That's not just airline policy, that's federal law." He was technically correct, which Marcus knew was the most dangerous kind of correct. A captain could refuse cockpit access even to authorized individuals if they believed it posed a safety risk. The question would be whether Brennan could articulate a legitimate safety concern. "What's your safety concern, Captain?" Marcus asked, standing up but not approaching. Specifically, Brennan turned to face him fully. "My concern is unauthorized individuals in secured areas. But I am authorized, according to papers that anyone could forge. Papers that your airline has verified through federal databases. Databases can be hacked." Marcus almost smiled. "So your position is that the federal government's secure aviation databases have been compromised, and I've somehow managed to forge documents that passed multiple levels of your airline's security screening?" "It's possible," Brennan insisted, though his argument was sounding increasingly thin even to his supporters in the gate area. "Or," Marcus said, taking a single step forward, "is your real concern something else entirely?" The gate area went silent again. Brennan's face was now fully red, veins visible at his temples. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question. What specifically about me makes you believe I'm a security risk?" "Your attitude for one," Brennan shot back. "This insistence on special treatment. Following federal authorization protocols is special treatment? When you people—" Brennan caught himself, but it was too late. He'd said it again, and this time everyone had heard it clearly. "There it is," the young woman live streaming said loudly. He said it again. "You people." First Officer Mitchell finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, maybe we should—" "What?" Brennan whirled on his first officer. "You want to question my judgment too? You want to keep flying, Mitchell? You'll back me up here." The threat was naked, obvious. Mitchell's face went white. He was young, probably still on probation, certainly in no position to challenge a 30-year captain. He stepped back, lowering his eyes. Sharon, the flight attendant, was braver. "Captain Brennan, with respect, this is escalating beyond—" "Sharon, stick to your galley," Brennan snapped. "This is a flight deck matter." The dismissal was so casual, so practiced, that it spoke volumes about Brennan's usual management style. Sharon's face flushed, but she too stepped back. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brennan announced to the gate area, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he probably used for weather delays and mechanical issues. "We'll be departing as soon as we resolve this security issue with an unauthorized individual demanding cockpit access. I apologize for the inconvenience, but your safety is my paramount concern." "He's not unauthorized," the business suit woman called out. "You verified his papers." Ma'am, Brennan's smile was condescending. With all due respect, you don't understand the complexities of aviation security. I understand discrimination when I see it, she shot back. Brennan's smile vanished. That's a serious accusation. It's an observation, the woman replied. Would you be doing this if he was white? The question hung in the air like smoke from a struck match. Everyone waited for Brennan's answer. This has nothing to do with race, Brennan said, but his voice had lost some of its commanding authority. Then what does it have to do with? Marcus asked. Please, Captain, explain to everyone here what specific characteristic I possess that makes me a security risk. Brennan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Your aggressive insistence on accessing secured areas by presenting proper documentation and following established procedures? By refusing to accept the captain's authority. I've accepted your authority, Marcus said calmly. I've complied with security, I've stepped aside, I've remained calm and professional. What I haven't accepted is discrimination. How dare you, Captain Brennan? David Chen interrupted, sweat visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning. American Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. I need you to articulate a specific, documentable safety concern about Mr. Williams, or we need to proceed with standard jump seat protocols. Brennan looked around the gate area, at the phones recording, at the passengers watching, at his own crew carefully not meeting his eyes. Fine, he said finally. You want specific? Check his background. Run a complete security screening. These people always have something to hide. The gate area erupted. Several passengers started shouting at once. The live streaming woman was narrating rapidly to her audience, her follower count climbing by the second. Cowboy's cap man was defending the captain while being shouted down by 3 other passengers. Marcus alone remained calm, though he made sure his tablet captured Brennan's words perfectly. These people always have something to hide, would play very interestingly at a federal hearing. We've already run a background check, Jennifer Hayes said quietly. It's part of the jump seat authorization process. Run it again, Brennan demanded. Full criminal history, credit check, no-fly list, everything. Captain? David Chen's voice was strained. That's not standard procedure. Nothing about this is standard. Brennan's composure finally cracked completely. In 30 years of flying, I have never had one of them in my cockpit, and I'm not starting today. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Cowboy's cap man looked uncomfortable now. First Officer Mitchell had actually taken several steps back, as if trying to physically distance himself from his captain. Sharon, the flight attendant, had tears in her eyes. Whether from anger or embarrassment, Marcus couldn't tell. One of them, Marcus repeated, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Thank you for finally being clear, Captain. Brennan realized what he'd said, realized it had been captured by dozens of phones, was probably already being uploaded to social media, would likely be viral within hours. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. You know what I mean, he said, his voice lower but no less venomous. I do, Marcus agreed. Everyone here does. David Chen looked like he might vomit. Captain Brennan, I'm calling corporate. This needs executive involvement. Call whoever you want, Brennan said. I'm the captain. This is my aircraft, and I decide who belongs here. He turned and walked through the jet bridge toward the plane, his stride still confident, still commanding. At the aircraft door, he turned back one more time. Mr. Williams, you have 2 choices. Take a seat in the cabin like a normal passenger, or find another flight. But you will not enter my cockpit. Not today, not ever. Then he disappeared into the aircraft, leaving chaos in his wake. Jennifer Hayes was crying now, quietly but visibly. David Chen was on his phone, speaking rapidly to someone, occasionally saying, "Yes, sir," and "I understand." And no, he actually said that. The passengers were divided into camps. Those appalled by Brennan's behavior, those defending him, and those just wanting to know if the flight was still departing on time. The live streaming woman was interviewing other passengers, getting their reactions. First Officer Mitchell approached Marcus hesitantly. Sir, I want you to know, this isn't... He couldn't seem to form a complete sentence. It's all right, Marcus told him. I know you're in a difficult position. He could end my career, Mitchell whispered. One bad review from him and no airline will touch me. I understand, Marcus said. And he did. The aviation industry was small, insular, and reputation-based. A young first officer couldn't afford to challenge a senior captain, especially one as established as Brennan. But this is wrong, Mitchell continued, seeming to find some courage. What he's doing, what he's saying, it's wrong. Yes, Marcus agreed simply, it is. 40 minutes had passed since Captain Brennan had retreated to his aircraft. The gate area had become a complex ecosystem of competing interests and escalating tensions. 3 news crews had arrived. Apparently, the livestream had gone viral enough to attract local media attention. American Airlines corporate security was now on scene, their radios crackling with coded communications. Through it all, Marcus remained seated, calm, occasionally taking notes on his tablet. He'd refused 3 interview requests from reporters, politely declining to comment on an ongoing situation. Then she arrived. Regional Vice President Carol Washington moved through the crowd like a warship through rough seas, powerful, purposeful, and impossible to ignore. A black woman in her 50s, she wore her authority like armor and her anger like a weapon. David Chen practically wilted with relief when he saw her. "Mr. Williams," she approached Marcus directly, extending her hand. "I'm Carol Washington, Regional VP for American Airlines. I apologize for this situation." Marcus stood and shook her hand. "No apology necessary from you, Ms. Washington." She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "David has briefed me. I've also reviewed the—" She paused, choosing her words carefully with the media present. "Extensive documentation of the incident. Captain Brennan's behavior is unacceptable and does not reflect American Airlines values." "I appreciate that," Marcus said neutrally. Carol turned toward the jet bridge. "I'll be speaking with Captain Brennan now." "He won't come out," David warned. "We've tried. He's locked himself in the cockpit and says he won't discuss it until departure." Carol's smile was sharp as a blade. "He'll discuss it with me." She strode down the jet bridge with David and 2 security officers trailing behind. The gate area fell silent, everyone straining to hear what would happen next. They didn't have to wait long. Carol's voice, when it came, was loud enough to carry back to the gate, despite being muffled by distance and aircraft walls. "Captain Brennan, you will open this cockpit door immediately, or I will have maintenance remove it." There was a long pause, then the distinctive sound of a cockpit door being opened. The conversation that followed was too quiet to hear clearly, but it lasted exactly 12 minutes. Then Carol emerged, her face set in professional neutrality that didn't quite hide her fury. Captain Brennan was behind her, and the change in his demeanor was striking. Gone was the commanding authority, the righteousness, the casual arrogance. He looked smaller somehow, older, his face pale except for 2 spots of color high on his cheeks. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes as he walked through the gate area. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carol announced, "Flight 447 will be departing shortly with a new flight crew. We apologize for the delay and any inconvenience." "This is ridiculous!" Brennan suddenly exploded, stopping near the gate counter. 30 years of perfect service. 30 years. "Captain Brennan?" Carol's voice was ice. "We'll discuss your service record in private." "No!" Brennan turned to face the passengers, the media, anyone who would listen. "This is what happens now? One complaint from someone who doesn't belong here and suddenly 30 years means nothing?" "Captain," Carol started. "He's not even supposed to be in the cockpit." Brennan continued, pointing at Marcus. "Ask any real pilot. Would you want some random government bureaucrat sitting in your jump seat, judging how you fly?" Several pilots in the gate area, deadheading crew waiting for their flights, looked away uncomfortably. None of them spoke up to support Brennan. "He's probably never even been in a cockpit before," Brennan ranted. "Doesn't know the first thing about aviation, about the traditions, about what it means to be a captain." Marcus stood slowly. "Captain Brennan, I need to inform you of something." His voice was quiet, but something in its tone made everyone turn to look at him. "Whatever you need to say can wait for the lawyers," Brennan snarled. "No," Marcus said, pulling out his credentials. "This needs to be said now." He held up his Federal Air Marshal badge, letting everyone in the gate area see it clearly. "I'm not just a passenger, Captain Brennan. I'm a Federal Air Marshal." The color drained from Brennan's face so quickly that David Chen actually stepped forward, apparently concerned the captain might faint. "Air Marshal?" Brennan's voice was barely a whisper. "Air Marshals sit in the cabin." "Regular Air Marshals do, yes," Marcus agreed. "Then what—" Marcus let the silence stretch for a moment, then continued. "Captain Brennan, for the past 6 months, the Federal Air Marshal Service has been conducting integrity assessments of flight crew members. These assessments were requested by American Airlines management following multiple complaints of discriminatory behavior by senior pilots." Carol Washington's expression didn't change, but her slight nod confirmed Marcus's words. "This morning's interaction was part of that assessment," Marcus continued. "Every word you've said, every action you've taken, has been documented as part of an official federal investigation." Brennan's legs seemed to give out. He caught himself on the gate counter, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. You're lying, he managed. This is entrapment. This is accountability, Marcus corrected. You were given every opportunity to simply follow federal aviation protocols. Instead, you chose to reveal exactly the kind of discrimination these assessments were designed to identify. I want my union rep, Brennan said weakly. You'll have that opportunity, Carol Washington interjected. But first, Mr. Williams, I believe you have more to share. Marcus nodded. The crowd pressed closer, phones raised, everyone sensing something momentous was about to happen. Marcus looked around the gate area, at the passengers, the crew, the media, and finally at Captain Richard Brennan, who stood gripping the counter like a man on a sinking ship. You're right about one thing, Captain, Marcus said. Regular air marshals don't inspect cockpits. He pulled out a second set of credentials, these more elaborate than the first. I'm Director Marcus Williams, head of the Federal Air Marshal Service Pilot Assessment Division. The silence was absolute. Even the ambient airport noise seemed to fade into the background. The Pilot Assessment Division was created 18 months ago. Marcus continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was done hiding his position. Our mandate is to evaluate the psychological fitness and professional conduct of commercial pilots, particularly in matters of discrimination, bias, and abuse of authority. Brennan's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish pulled from water. Your airline, Captain Brennan, specifically requested our involvement after receiving 3 formal complaints about your conduct over the past 2 years. Complaints that were internally investigated but ultimately dismissed due to what was described as insufficient evidence and he said, she said situations. Those complaints were bullshit, Brennan managed to croak. Were they? Marcus pulled up something on his tablet. January of this year, First Officer Sandra Kim reported that you told her Asian women shouldn't be in cockpits. They're too emotional and can't handle the pressure. Several people in the crowd gasped. The live streaming woman muttered, "Oh my God." March, Marcus continued, Flight Attendant Jerome Washington, no relation to Ms. Washington here, reported that you refused to allow him to make standard cabin announcements because, quote, passengers don't want to hear a gay voice telling them about safety. Sharon, the senior flight attendant, covered her mouth with both hands, tears flowing freely now. And in July, Marcus read from his tablet, passenger Amira Hassan filed a complaint stating that you announced over the PA system that passengers wearing head coverings would be subject to additional security screening. A policy that doesn't exist and that you apparently invented on the spot. Those were all misunderstandings, Brennan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Were they misunderstandings, Captain? Or were they patterns of behavior that you've been allowed to continue because of your seniority and the reluctance of junior crew members to challenge you? Marcus turned to address the wider audience. The Federal Air Marshal Service takes transportation security very seriously. But security isn't just about weapons and threats. It's about ensuring that every person who steps onto an aircraft, passenger or crew, is treated with dignity and respect. It's about making sure that pilots entrusted with hundreds of lives aren't making decisions based on prejudice and bias. He turned back to Brennan. This morning's test was simple, Captain. All you had to do was follow standard jump seat protocols. Check my documentation, verify its authenticity, and allow a federal official with proper authorization to observe your flight operations. That's it. You tricked me, Brennan said. I presented you with a situation. You revealed your character. Marcus's voice hardened. You looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong in your cockpit. Not because of my credentials, not because of safety concerns, but because of the color of my skin. That's not... You said you people, Captain. You said you'd never had one of them in your cockpit. You said I should sit in the back where I belong. Your words, Captain. Your choices. Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call, putting it on speaker. Director Williams, a voice answered. Deputy Director Harrison, are you monitoring? We have everything, sir. Full audio and video documentation of the entire incident. Please proceed with filing recommendations. Yes, sir. Recommendation for immediate suspension of flight privileges for Captain Richard Brennan, employee number 447829, American Airlines. Recommendation for full FAA review of fitness for duty. Recommendation for civil rights investigation based on documented discriminatory behavior. Each word hit Brennan like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged further with each recommendation. Carol Washington stepped forward. Captain Brennan, effective immediately, you are suspended from flight duty pending investigation. Please surrender your wings and identification. You can't do this, Brennan whispered. 30 years? 30 years of how many incidents like this? Marcus asked. How many first officers too scared to speak up? How many flight attendants dismissed and ignored? How many passengers made to feel unwelcome on aircraft they had every right to be on? He stepped closer to Brennan, lowering his voice so only those nearest could hear. You asked if I knew anything about aviation, about what it means to be a captain. I know this. A captain is responsible for every soul on their aircraft. Every soul, Captain Brennan. Not just the ones who look like you. This will ruin me, Brennan said, and for the first time there was real fear in his voice. No, Captain, your choices ruined you. This is just the consequence. Carol Washington gestured to security. Please escort Captain Brennan from the aircraft in secure area. As security officers flanked him, Brennan made one last desperate play. What about my pension, my family? 30 years of service has to count for something. Marcus met his gaze steadily. It does count. It's why this is suspension pending investigation, not immediate termination. You'll have due process, union representation, appeals. More courtesy than you showed me today. But the investigation will find exactly what we documented today, Carol Washington added. And I suspect once word gets out, other crew members who've been afraid to speak up might finally feel safe enough to come forward. As if on cue, Sharon, the flight attendant, stepped forward. They will, I'll make sure of it. First Officer Mitchell nodded. Me too. There are stories. Things we've all seen but were too afraid to report. Brennan looked at his crew, people he'd flown with for years, and saw no sympathy, no support, just relief that someone had finally held him accountable. Ladies and gentlemen, Carol Washington announced to the gate area, Captain Mitchell will be assuming command of Flight 447 with a replacement first officer from our reserve crew. We'll be boarding in approximately 20 minutes. Ma'am? Mitchell looked stunned. I'm not qualified to... You have your ATP license, correct? You're type-rated on the 737? Yes, but... Then you're qualified. Consider this your captain's upgrade check ride, Mr. Mitchell. I believe Director Williams will be observing from the jump seat, as originally planned. Mitchell looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. It would be an honor, sir, Mitchell said, his voice stronger. As security led Brennan away, he turned back one final time. This is reverse discrimination. I'll sue. My lawyers? Captain Brennan, Marcus interrupted. You might want to save your money for those lawyers. The FAA will be investigating all your flights for the past 5 years. Every complaint that was dismissed, every incident that was covered up, every passenger who was made to feel unwelcome on an aircraft. How many do you think they'll find? Brennan's face went from pale to gray. Without another word, he allowed security to lead him away. 25 minutes later, Marcus settled into the jump seat in the cockpit of Flight 447. Captain Mitchell, he'd have to get used to that title, was running through his pre-flight checklist with nervous precision. The replacement first officer, a competent-looking woman named Davies, was handling communications with the tower. Director Williams to Mitchell said as they waited for pushback clearance, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How many other pilots have failed your assessment?" Marcus considered the question. "In 18 months? 7. Captain Brennan makes 8. Out of how many tested? 43. Mitchell did the math. "That's actually not as bad as I expected. Most pilots are good people," Marcus agreed. "They want to do the right thing, but the ones who aren't." He trailed off, looking out at the Dallas morning sky. The ones who aren't can make life miserable for everyone else. And they're usually senior, established, protected by tradition and seniority. "Not anymore," Davies said firmly. "No," Marcus agreed, "not anymore." The pushback tractor connected to the aircraft, and they began rolling backward from the gate. Through the cockpit window, Marcus could see the terminal, could even make out the gate area where everything had happened. Some passengers were still there, probably recounting the story to anyone who would listen. "Ground control, American 447, ready for taxi," Davies announced. "American 447, taxi to runway 17 right via Alpha, Alpha 7, hold short of 17 right." As they taxied, Mitchell kept glancing at Marcus. Finally, he asked what was clearly on his mind. "Sir, was this whole thing really planned? The whole confrontation?" "The opportunity was planned," Marcus clarified. "A federal air marshal with jump seat authorization boarding a flight with a captain who'd been complained about multiple times. But Captain Brennan's response? That was all him. He could have just let you sit here. He could have. And if he'd treated me like any other authorized jump seat passenger, he would have passed the assessment. I would have observed the flight, filed a report stating no discriminatory behavior was observed, and that would have been that. Instead, he destroyed his career," Davies said. "He revealed his character," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." They reached the runway hold short line. "American 447 cleared for takeoff runway 17. Right, fly heading 180, climb and maintain 5,000. Cleared for takeoff 17. Right, heading 180, climb and maintain 5,000, American 447, Davies responded. Mitchell advanced the throttles and the 737's engines roared to life. As they accelerated down the runway, Marcus thought about Brennan's words. How the cockpit was sacred space. How it belonged only to certain people. The nose wheel lifted off the ground, then the main gear, and they were airborne, climbing into the bright Texas morning. Positive rate, gear up, Davies announced. Gear up, Mitchell confirmed. As Dallas fell away beneath them, Marcus looked at the two pilots. A young black woman and a white man barely 30, working together with professional precision and mutual respect. This was what the cockpit should be. A place where competence mattered more than color, where character mattered more than connections. Director Williams? Mitchell asked as they climbed through 3,000 feet. Yes, Captain? Mitchell smiled at the title. What happens to Brennan now? Due process, Marcus replied. Investigation, hearings, appeals if he wants them. But with what we documented today, plus whatever else comes out, he shrugged. Best case scenario for him, he's forced into early retirement with a reduced pension. Worst case, if we find evidence of actual safety violations stemming from his discriminatory behavior, criminal charges. And American Airlines? They'll review their complaint procedures, probably implement new training, maybe create an anonymous reporting system. They called us in because they knew they had a problem. Today proved they were right. They broke through a thin layer of clouds into brilliant sunshine. The cockpit was filled with golden light, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Then Davies said, "You know what the saddest part is? He was probably a good pilot. Technically, I mean. 30 years, no accidents, no violations. Being a good pilot isn't just about technical skills," Marcus said. It's about judgment. And a pilot who looks at passengers and sees us and them? That's a fundamental judgment failure. American 447, contact Fort Worth Center on 134.9, came through the radio. 134.9 American 447, Davies responded, switching frequencies. As they climbed toward cruising altitude, Marcus pulled out his tablet and began composing his report. There would be paperwork, investigations, probably media attention. The video from the gate was almost certainly viral by now. There would be those who called him a hero and those who accused him of entrapment. There would be threats from Brennan's supporters and thanks from those who'd suffered similar discrimination. But none of that mattered as much as this moment. Sitting in a cockpit that Brennan had said he'd never be allowed to enter, watching two professional pilots fly 180 passengers safely to their destination, knowing that one small corner of the aviation industry had been made a little more just. Director Williams? Mitchell interrupted his thoughts. We're approaching cruising altitude. Would you like to take the controls for a bit? Marcus looked up, surprised. I'm not a pilot, Captain. I know, but after everything today? I don't know. It seems right. I'll be right here, hands on the controls with you. Just for a minute. Marcus looked at the control yoke in front of him, then at Mitchell's earnest face. Why not? He put his hands on the yoke, feeling the subtle vibrations of the aircraft, the tiny corrections needed to maintain straight and level flight. Mitchell kept his hands on his own yoke, ready to take over instantly if needed, but letting Marcus feel what it was like to fly. How does it feel? Davies asked. Marcus thought about it. Through the windscreen, the sky stretched endlessly in all directions, brilliant blue fading to white at the horizon. Below, America spread out in all its complex glory. Cities and farms, rivers and roads, millions of people going about their lives, each with their own dreams and struggles. It feels like freedom, he said finally, like possibility. That's what Brennan never understood, Mitchell said. The sky doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to everyone. Marcus nodded, gently releasing the controls back to Mitchell. You're going to be a good captain. I hope so. I had a good example today of what not to be, and a better example of what standing up for what's right looks like. The flight continued toward Washington, smooth and unremarkable, exactly as it should be. In the cabin, passengers were probably sleeping, reading, working on laptops, unaware of who was in the cockpit or the drama that had preceded their departure. That too was as it should be. Their right to travel in peace and safety, regardless of their race, religion, or any other characteristic, protected by people like Marcus who did their jobs quietly and professionally. As they began their descent into Reagan National, Marcus thought about Brennan one more time. The man was probably still at DFW, maybe in an airline office with his union representative, maybe already on the phone with lawyers, certainly watching his 30-year career crumble in real time. There would be some who sympathized with him, who saw him as a victim of political correctness or cancel culture. They would point to his years of service, his technical skills, his perfect safety record. They would say that one bad day shouldn't define a career, but Marcus knew better. This wasn't one bad day. This was one day when Brennan's true character had been revealed, when the protective layers of seniority and tradition had been stripped away, leaving only the ugly truth of his prejudice. "Beginning our descent," Mitchell announced. "Director Williams, thank you for being here today." "Thank you for finding the courage to speak up," Marcus replied. "It's not easy to challenge authority, especially in this industry." "It shouldn't require courage to do the right thing," Davies said. "No," Marcus agreed. "But until it doesn't, we need people brave enough to do it anyway." They descended through 10,000 feet, the Washington Monument visible in the distance, the Potomac River winding beneath them like a silver ribbon. The capital of a nation still struggling with its ideals, still fighting to live up to its promises of equality and justice for all. American 447, cleared ILS approach runway 19, contact tower at Lynx. Cleared ILS 19, tower at Lynx, American 447. The landing was smooth, professional, exactly what passengers expected and deserved. As they taxied to the gate, Marcus saw the Federal Air Marshal Service vehicles waiting, his team ready to debrief, to process the mountain of evidence they'd collected. But first, he had one more duty. He picked up the cabin microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Director Marcus Williams of the Federal Air Marshal Service. I want to thank you for your patience during the delay in Dallas. I also want to assure you that American Airlines and the federal government take discrimination seriously. Every person who boards an aircraft has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Today's events, while unfortunate, demonstrate our commitment to that principle." He paused, choosing his final words carefully. "To those of you who spoke up, who questioned what you saw, who refused to accept discrimination even when it came from authority, thank you. Change happens when good people refuse to remain silent. Have a wonderful day, and welcome to Washington." As passengers deplaned, many stopped to shake Marcus's hand, to thank him, to share their own stories of discrimination faced and overcome. The young woman who'd been live streaming pressed a business card into his hand. "If you ever need the footage for court, I've got everything in 4K. When the aircraft was finally empty, Marcus stood in the cockpit one last time. Mitchell and Davies were finishing their shutdown checklist, professional to the end. "What now?" Mitchell asked. "Now I write reports," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Lots of reports. And you fly planes, Captain. Lots of planes, hopefully. With a better understanding of what really matters," Mitchell said. Marcus nodded and made his way off the aircraft. At the jet bridge, he turned back to look at the 737 one more time. It was just a machine, aluminum and composites and complex systems. But it was also something more, a symbol of human achievement, of our ability to defy gravity, to soar above our limitations. Captain Brennan had thought the sky belonged to him, that he could decide who was worthy of sharing that miraculous space above the earth. He'd been wrong. The sky belonged to everyone. Every child who pressed their face to an airport window to watch planes take off. Every person who'd ever looked up at a contrail and wondered about the journey happening miles above. Every human being who carried within them the ancient dream of flight. As Marcus walked through Reagan National, his phone buzzed with messages. The video had indeed gone viral. Sky Marshal's justice was trending. American Airlines had released a statement. The FAA was preparing a press conference. The story would dominate the news cycle for days, maybe weeks. But Marcus was already thinking about the next assessment, the next test, the next opportunity to ensure that the friendly skies were truly friendly to all. There were 43 pilots who'd passed their assessments, who'd proven that they could see past skin color and treat every person with professional respect. They far outnumbered the Brennans of the industry. The future of aviation belonged to pilots like Captain Mitchell and First Officer Davies, professionals who understood that diversity wasn't a threat to tradition, but an enhancement of it. That a cockpit where everyone belonged was safer and stronger than one guarded by prejudice. Outside the terminal, the November air was crisp and clear. Aircraft climbed into the sky every few minutes, each one carrying hundreds of stories, hundreds of dreams, hundreds of people trusting that they would be treated fairly and flown safely. Marcus looked up at a departing flight climbing toward the sun, its metal skin gleaming like silver fire. Somewhere up there, in cockpits across the country, pilots were making decisions that would affect countless lives. Most would make the right choices, but for those who wouldn't, for those who still believed the sky belonged only to them, Marcus and his team would be waiting. Because the sky didn't belong to any one person or group. It belonged to everyone who'd ever dared to dream of flight, everyone who'd ever looked up and wondered what lay beyond the clouds. The Sky Marshal's sky was everyone's sky, and Marcus Williams would make sure it stayed that way.